It's a real shame that we're having to hold this roundtable. Had government officials, the heads of our healthcare agencies, had they been doing their job, had they been honest and transparent with the American public, we wouldn't be here today. Now, our government officials, I talked about them not being particularly honest, not being particularly transparent. We invited them all here. Representatives from the heads of the CDC, Secretary of Defense Austin, Secretary of Labor Walsh, Secretary of Transportation Buttigieg, FDA Acting Commissioner Woodcock, HHS Secretary Becerra, NIAID Director Fauci, NIH Director Collins, together with the CEOs of Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, Pfizer, and BioNTech. None of them showed up. Of the people who have died from COVID in the UK with the Delta variant over the last 7.5 months, 63% have been fully vaccinated. Over the last 4 weeks in the UK, 78% of those that have died with the Delta variant from COVID, 78% have been fully vaccinated.
My name is Joel Walskog. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm an orthopedic surgeon from Mequon, Wisconsin. After high school, I spent almost 14 years in education and training. I've developed a large orthopedic practice focusing primarily on joint replacement. I average over 5,000 patient visits per year and perform well over 800 surgical procedures per year. While my personal core identity focuses on my family, I love my job as an orthopedic surgeon. My patients and coworkers will undoubtedly say that I have a passion for my job. On December 30th of 2020, I received the first Moderna COVID vaccine without incident initially. Approximately 1 week later, I recognized that my feet were numb, a sensation of pins and needles. I also began having powerful electrical shock sensations down my entire spine, radiating to my feet. Within days, I obtained an MRI of my cervical spine. It revealed no acute changes to account for my numbness. Moved forward 3 or 4 days, I was sitting in a clinic room at work talking with a patient. I attempted just simply to stand from a sitting position. I couldn't stand. I pushed myself up with my arms, then quickly fell backwards. Later that day, I had MRIs of my thoracic and lumbar spine. I soon saw a neurologist, actually 2 to 3 days later, who diagnosed me with transverse myelitis, a rare condition that involves a demyelinated lesion of my thoracic spinal cord. While my neurologist recommended I take 2 or 3 months off of work, I agreed to take 2 weeks. After I returned, I operated on 2 consecutive days, although an intended shortened schedule. After the second day, I felt horrible. I was numb from my umbilicus to my feet. I could barely walk, and I have been off work since. I'm just not safe to work as an orthopedic surgeon. After my diagnosis, I brought up the question of whether my condition could be related to the Moderna COVID vaccine that I received. I asked my employer to report it to VAERS. I was aware that the UK AstraZeneca COVID vaccine trial was delayed twice because of 3 cases of transverse myelitis. Assuming the FDA and the CDC would be alarmed at my diagnosis, I expected to be contacted soon after my VAERS submission. No phone call, no contact. In fact, weeks passed. I then contacted the CDC myself. They acknowledged my VAERS submission, but stated my reaction was categorized as not serious, as I had not been hospitalized and I hadn't died. I have never heard from the CDC again. No contact with the NIH, no contact from the FDA. I notified Moderna directly numerous times and asked that I be contacted. No one from Moderna ever contacted me. One word describes how I felt in the first few months after my diagnosis: abandoned. My life has dramatically changed after this adverse reaction. My career of 19 years, that I took almost 14 years to train for, is likely over. While my electrical sensations have decreased, my numbness, weakness, and poor balance are unchanged as compared to January of 2021. I compare myself now to a car. I begin each day with a quarter tank of gas. When my fuel tank is empty, I'm done for the day. If I overdo it, like today, I plan on spending the next day or two on the couch. Let me be clear, I am pro-vaccine. I got one Moderna COVID vaccine. Let me be clear, I had a real adverse event. I urge the CDC, the FDA, the NIH, and all other involved governmental agencies to listen to the injured. Their adverse events are real. I urge everyone to become open and transparent with COVID vaccine data. The VAERS system is grossly inadequate. I am bewildered how we as a country seem to be dependent on foreign data. I urge additional monies to be allocated to studying the etiologies and treatment of these adverse events. I also urge Congress to enact legislation to allow for financial remedy under the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program for those injured by the COVID-19 vaccinations. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Stephanie DeGarry, and this is my daughter, Maddie. When she was 12 years old, she participated in the Pfizer COVID vaccine trial for 12 to 15-year-olds at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. This is the first trial any of my kids have ever been in. I never had considered ever putting them in a trial before, but this seemed like, when they asked if they could be in it, it seemed like a win-win, So it's been over 9 months since she got her second dose. She can't walk. She's in a wheelchair. She has an NG tube for all of her nutrition. She has constant pain in her stomach, back, and neck. She was over there laying on chairs because she can't make it through this. She can't feel her legs, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. When she got her first dose, her reaction was typical. She had fever, body aches, and fatigue, and it went away in a couple days. When she got her second dose, she had immediate pain where she had gotten the injection, and the first thing she told me because her dad took her, was that didn't happen. That hurt way more than the first time, like enough to point it out. In less than 12 hours, she developed severe abdominal pain, horrible nausea, painful electric shocks on her spine and neck. Her hands were ice cold when you touched them. She had, and on her feet, pain all over her body. Her vaccine arm went numb. And I'm finding more and more stuff. You forget stuff because so much has happened to her. Like as I read through things, I keep redocumenting everything. She had chest pain, severe chest pain. The way she described it, it felt like her heart was being pulled out of her neck. Tachycardia that was actually seen on an EKG. And she was extremely dizzy, so she felt like she couldn't stand up. So those were her reactions. I just want to walk through, give you everybody a better idea of what happens in a trial, because I did not know. My kids have never been in a trial before. So I went in trusting the drug companies, the FDA, CDC, the hospital where the trial was held, Cincinnati Children's, a very reputable hospital. So when you enter the trial, everybody uses a trial app, and there are slides, and they'll be available later so that you can see more detail. It's called TrialMax, and they log the reaction for 7 days after each dose. That's it. The app only allows you to record solicited adverse events like fever, redness, injections, site pain, swelling, headache, vomiting, and other typical expected reactions. That is it. And you say mild, moderate, severe. Severe means that you had to go to the ER. You record your fever, like the actual amount, and the swelling. So that's all the detail. There's no free form at all to fill in any other reaction that you have beyond the typical non-serious adverse events other than anaphylactic shock. So there's a full list on real.com/about that will be available. What you have to do if you have any other type of adverse event is you have to call the study doctor or the principal investigator. And that's the only way to record this. There's no way to have any unbiased way of entering it in and documenting it. I'm sorry, I'm going off track. So we did what we were told. We called the study doctor, and they told us to go to Cincinnati Children's ER, where the trial was held, to check for appendicitis. She did not have appendicitis. They couldn't even find her appendix. What made it into the trial record is unclear. And yes, we did ask several times and have it documented. We still don't know what was actually reported. So basically, as you can see, this leaves a lot of room for human error and concern of reporting bias coming from the principal investigator, which was Dr. Frank in her case. So what was said about Maddie, the next slide, if you go then to the documentation, so the New England Journal of Medicine article about the Pfizer COVID vaccine in adolescents. So first, take note that the principal investigator for Maddie's trial is the lead author for the New England Journal of Medicine article. The adverse events section has 308 words. 76 of those were dedicated to describing one single patient that had simply a temperature greater than 40 degrees. Not great to have, but that, I think this is a little more severe. There's absolutely no mention of any of Maddie's adverse reactions in that article. Zero. In the EUA amendment, Maddie's adverse reaction was reduced to 5 lines that they claim was eventually diagnosed as functional abdominal pain. It's a stomach ache. By the data cutoff for the trial, on March 13th, Maddie experienced over 35 adverse events, different things happening to her, very similar to all the stories that you're hearing here. This happened during the trial. Some examples are blood in her urine, 7 times, decreased vision, loss of feeling from her waist down, dizziness, fainting, tremors, muscle weakness, and more. They're all available in the slides, all of her reactions. None of these were mentioned in either document. She went to the ER 9 times and was hospitalized 3 times for a total of 63 days, and this was by June 1st. Look at the dates of that article and around when this was approved. Maddie was in the hospital when the EUA was approved for 12 to 15-year-olds. The doctor did not even know it. So let me ask you this. Functional abdominal pain, stomach ache. Does your child, when they have a stomach ache, does that put your child in a wheelchair? Does your child's stomach ache require a feeding tube? Does your child spend 64 days in hospital for their stomach ache? If they did a urine test when they have a stomach ache, would there be blood in their urine? I don't think so. I thought that Maddie would be in the best hands possible, and the rare chance she has a severe reaction, that was not the case. They did everything in their power to hide everything that happened to her. And that is why this is happening to all these other people and kids. So my question is, you're hearing my story. Maddie was not kicked out of the trial, so she's still in it. By the way, so is my son Lucas, who he was in the placebo group, and he did not get the vaccine. So they have one person, if you want to know that they can, and he hasn't had COVID. If they minimalize Maddie's reaction to the vaccine like this, I wonder what really happened to those in the clinical trials who had a reaction to the first dose. They never got to have the second dose. That means they're out of the trial. They're disqualified. I wonder what else was hidden in either the Pfizer trial or any of the other ones, because I know there were things hidden. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I've got a quick question. Obviously, we invited the CEO from Pfizer or some representative from Pfizer. Nobody showed up. Because you had the courage to come forward in June, you have had some media attention, not by the mainstream media, but Pfizer has to be aware of you. Have they reached out to you since June?
Neither Pfizer, the FDA, or the CDC has ever talked to us or attempted to. We have never heard anything from them, ever. And I did file it in VAERS also. Still didn't hear anything.
So that is outrageous. I mean, not only totally cast aside, but I think what you described in your testimony I would term it as a cover-up.
So as you know, a year ago, I received my COVID vaccine when I gladly signed up for a clinical trial here in the United States with AstraZeneca. As a participant of a clinical trial, I was constantly reassured that if something were to go wrong, there would be thorough and meticulously developed protocols in place to provide a safety net, that the data would be collected and the benefits as well as the risks would be assessed and disclosed to the public. I never had any issue with any vaccine, so I figured this was going to be a smooth, easy ride. No big deal. Prior to my involvement, the pharmaceutical company agreed to pay any medical expense as a result of a possible injury. Unfortunately, for a lack of support on their part, we have had to refinance our home to pay for our medical expenses. Like Maddie's trial, we had a tracking app. Like Maddie's trial, our tracking app had pre-designated symptoms in a bullet list with no free form to add any other symptoms. So anything like tingling, tremors, seizures, paresthesias, heart problems, limb weakness. There was no way for us to track that through the app. The clinical trial report published by the New England Journal of Medicine, if I have that slide, it says that the second dose is required to continue in a study. Because my reaction was so severe, AstraZeneca told me I was not allowed to get the second dose. They dropped me from the trial. My data was lost. I was excluded from the trial results. My access to the trial app was deleted. This is different than what is found in the report, which says that these individuals chose to forego the second dose. Because I couldn't finish the series, I was removed. Why doesn't this data matter? The clinical trial report also says serious adverse events will be recorded from the time of signed informed consent through day 730. I last heard from them on day 60. I am almost at day 365. That is 10 months of critical safety data gone. I continued to suffer and decline as the trial progressed without me. So what are the agencies doing about this? As we have heard, there's a lot of questions that need answers. The heads of the NIH, FDA, and CDC have known firsthand about my case and thousands of others. These direct reports began as early as last December. I, along with several injured physicians, continued to reach out to the FDA through emails, phone calls. We did video conferences with Peter Marks and Janet Woodcock, constant emails with Janet Woodcock and myself directly. We have literally asked and we have begged repeatedly for them to acknowledge these reactions. They declined. They know that their lack of acknowledgement has created insurmountable barrier to our ability to receive medical care from doctors who rely on these agencies for information. They know about the issues with the clinical trials, they know about the deaths, they know about the lack of follow-up on VAERS, they know about the injuries to children, they know about Maddie. I have discussed Maddie with them. They know about the mandates imposed on the injured. They know about the suicides as the results of months-long suffering. They know about the aggressive censorship. They know about the media censorship. They know about the scientific censorship. They know all of it. And they have for months. What does the NIH know? I was one of a lucky few to go to the NIH for research in this area. There was about 50 to 60 people that participated in this research. There was invasive testing, all of the top-of-the-line tests you can imagine, tests that aren't even available to the public. We were instructed by the NIH not to talk about the research. We gladly complied, confident in their reassurances that they would publish their research last summer, which would finally open the door for all victims, all of these people, to receive appropriate medical care. Unfortunately, the NIH is no longer accepting calls on behalf of the injured. This happened shortly after the FDA met with us. This vital lifeline that saved hundreds, myself included, and maybe thousands, that lifeline has now been cut off. The NIH has told me and others that this is an immune-mediated response to the spike protein. CDC, FDA, NIH, we do exist. Your system is broken and you know it. You are constantly and persistently telling the public that your review of the data is thorough and your safety signaling systems are robust, when in reality, there is huge gaps in your system every single step of the way. You are not taking care of those who suffer severe adverse reactions. Stop telling the public that you are. Your refusal to take action means there will be more like us. Take responsibility for your role in the suffering of good Americans who did their part by taking the vaccine and had no idea this could happen to them. Here's your proper informed consent. If you get COVID, you will get medical help. But I'm afraid to tell you, if you have this reaction, that reaction, Maddie's reaction, Doug's reaction, you are on your own. The government won't help you. The drug companies won't help you. Your medical teams will have no idea what to do with you. Financially, you will be on your own. You will be completely on your own.
I want you to describe, because you talked to me after our June event. Going to the June event, there were something like 2,000 people on your various Facebook groups, support groups, people like your friend there that were using that group to comfort each other, provide counseling to, in your case, you're providing counseling to people who are suicidal. Literally within a week, I remember talking to Ken Rutgers. that group had grown to about 5,000. And then describe what Facebook did to your support groups.
They found us and quickly pulled us apart. They eliminated every single person in those groups, and we lost contact with a lot of people that were in crisis.
So you mentioned in your testimony that NIH knows about this, CDC knows about this, FDA knows about this. I appreciate what media came here, but not only did we invite these agency heads, we invited mainstream media, or more mainstream media, and of course they didn't show up.
My name is Cody Flint. I am a 33-year-old husband and a father of 2 young boys. I'm an agricultural pilot by profession with over 10,000 total flight hours. I have been very healthy my whole life with no underlying conditions. I received my first dose of the Pfizer COVID vaccine on February 1st. Within 30 minutes, I developed a severe stabbing headache that later became a burning sensation in the back of my neck. 2 days after vaccination, I got in my airplane to do a job that would take only a few hours. Immediately after taking off, I knew something was not right with me. I was starting to develop tunnel vision, and my headache was getting worse. Approximately 2 hours into my flying, I pulled my airplane up to turn around and felt an extreme burst of pressure in my ears. Instantly, I was nearly blacked out, dizzy, disoriented, nauseous, and shaking uncontrollably. By the grace of God, I was able to land my plane without incident, although I do not remember doing this. My initial diagnosis of vertigo and a severe panic attack, although I've never had a history of either of these, was later replaced with left and right perilymphatic fistulas, eustachian tube dysfunction, and elevated intracranial pressure due to brain swelling. My condition continued to decline, and my doctors told me only an adverse reaction to the vaccine or a major head trauma could have caused this much spontaneous damage. I've had 6 spinal taps over 8 months to monitor my intracranial pressure, and 2 surgeries 8 weeks apart to repair the fistulas. I have missed nearly an entire year of my life and part of my children's lives. Days of baseball games, playing in the backyard, and just picking up my kids to hug them have been replaced with being trapped in a sick body, doctor visits, invasive procedures, and more questions than answers. I don't know if I'll ever be able to fly an airplane again. This vaccine has taken my career from me and the future I have worked so hard to build. I have used all of my savings to pay medical bills and just to be able to survive. My family and I are on the verge of losing everything we have. I was and still am pro-science and pro-vaccine. The main issue rests squarely on the fact that the FDA, CDC, and NIH refuse to acknowledge that real lives are being absolutely destroyed by this vaccine. The federal government has yet to help a single one of the vaccine injured. It was my understanding that the federal government accepted the responsibility of helping people injured by this vaccine, considering they gave the vaccine manufacturers full legal immunity from people like me. The government has left us nowhere to turn for help. My family and I masked up, stayed indoors, and dodged COVID for over a year. We did what was asked of us by being part of the solution. That solution has taken everything from me and my family. We have been ignored and silenced. It is not right, and it needs to stop now. It is time for the federal government to do its part by acknowledging us and helping us. Does anyone really think it's fair to make the vaccine injured wait years for help? I think we can all agree that refusing or delaying the help we need is unconscionable. We urgently need this help. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Lieutenant Colonel Teresa Long, and I'm an Army Aerospace Medicine Specialist. Senator Johnson has invited me here to make a statement to him regarding my opinion about the life-threatening adverse side effects of COVID-19 vaccine. My opinion is formed from my medical education, training, and my firsthand experience treating soldiers injured by the vaccine. I believe the COVID vaccine is a greater threat to soldiers' health and military readiness than the virus itself. Last May, I attended the Senior Preventative Medicine Leadership course for the Army. When we're given an opportunity to ask the senior leaders questions, I simply asked. So we skipped 2 years of phase 2 trials and 3 years of phase 3 trials. We only lost 12 active duty soldiers to COVID, yet we're going to risk the health of the entire fighting force on a vaccine we only had 2 months of safety data on? The response was, "You're damn right, Colonel, and you're going to get every soldier you can to take the vaccine so I can get enough data points to determine if the vaccine is safe." There is no substitute for time. You can throw money at things, you can cut regulations, but there is no substitute for time. In June of 2021, the CDC announced that they were holding an emergency meeting to discuss higher than expected myocarditis in 16 to 24-year-olds. Despite this announcement, the military did not even pause their vaccination efforts. Why? I made numerous efforts to get senior medical leaders to, at the very least, inform soldiers of the risk. Leadership ignored my concerns. This is very troubling for many reasons. You can't have informed consent if you don't tell your patients of the risks and benefits of a treatment or procedure. With respect to aviation safety, risk communication is critical. I saw 5 patients in clinic, 2 of which presented with chest pain, days to weeks after vaccination, and were subsequently diagnosed with pericarditis and worked up to rule out myocarditis. The 3rd pilot had been vaccinated and felt like he was drunk, chronically fatigued within 24 hours after vaccination. The pilot told me he didn't know what to do, so he drank a lot of coffee to try and, quote, wake himself up, and continued to fly until he realized it wasn't going away. After I reported to my command my concerns that in one morning I had to ground 3 out of 3 pilots due to vaccine injuries, the next day my patients were canceled, my charts were pulled for review, and I was told that I would not be seeing acute patients anymore, just healthy pilots there for their flight physical. There's a concept of the 10th man, the loyal dissenter. That's the person that you select to be the dissenting opinion to prevent groupthink. Patients are entitled to a second opinion on their medical care. What happens when bureaucrats mandate that there is no dissenting opinion?
I was a father of a 16-year-old son, a single parent. I raised my boy since he was a baby. He meant the world to me. I got the vaccine to protect my son. And after in March, April, they're announcing how it was safe for teenagers. We got the Pfizer vaccine because I thought it was to protect him. I thought it was the right thing to do. It was like playing Russian roulette. My government lied to me. They said it was safe.
Before I started my speech, I just want to say thank you to Dr. Fauci, to the FDA heads, CDC, NIH, everyone for not showing up to this meeting and not listening to us. I really appreciate it. I'm glad that you have our interests at heart. This message is kind of for you. It's a message on how what's happening has broke my heart literally and figuratively with our country. My name is Kyle Warner. I'm a 29-year-old professional mountain bike racer and 3-time national champion. For most of my life, I have focused on being as healthy and positive as possible and inspiring other people to do the same. This spring, when the current administration was urging young, healthy Americans to get vaccinated to help end this war on the pandemic, I stepped up. I wanted to serve the greater good. I wanted to help fight this war, not because I was afraid of COVID, but because my country asked me to. You told me, this vaccine is safe and effective, period. And I believed you. This time, I ended up with my hand on my heart for a different reason. In June, I joined the rapidly growing number of young men who develop pericarditis post-mRNA vaccine. That is the inflammation of the liner surrounding the heart. That condition, along with POTS and reactive arthritis, have completely brought an end to life as I knew it. I have been bedridden, unable to work, and unable to exercise for months. I fear that my career has officially been ended. Listening to these stories today and looking at the VAERS database, it is easy to see that we have a serious problem arising. But you guys already know this. The real question is whether or not you will stand up to your favorite pharmaceutical lobbyist in defense of the American people you are supposed to serve. We were told we were fighting a war against the pandemic, and the question in the air is, will you leave your troops behind yet again? I'm not asking you to end the vaccine program by any means. All I'm asking is for some transparency and acknowledgement of what is happening, so that we as a country can have an honest discussion of the risks. I believe where there is risk, there must be choice. And without acknowledging that people are being seriously injured and dying, we are doing a great disservice to the American people. It is estimated that Moderna and Pfizer will make around $60 billion in revenue this year from COVID-19 vaccines. And with the rollout of boosters and mandates, it seems like much of that is destined to be recurring revenue. We need to set up a fund with a portion of vaccine proceeds to help heal and study injured Americans and compensate the families who have lost loved ones due to complications of the vaccine. This is the first ever mass administration of mRNA vaccines, and the drug companies need to compensate us if they are going to be testing on us.
My name is Douglas Cameron. Prior to April 5th, 2021, I was very healthy, physically active, 64-year-old when I received the Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccine at my workplace. I was encouraged by my employer to get the vaccine. The day after the vaccine, on April 6th, I started experiencing side effects I believe were related to the shot. I lost bladder control, suffered ED, my legs felt odd, I had a cinching sensation in my hips. Over the next few days, my symptoms worsened and I became alarmed, so I went to the ER, explained that I'd gotten the vaccine and what was happening. I was tested for COVID and tested positive. Blood work and an MRI were done, and I was sent home. 3 days after that, I told my wife I felt like I drank poison. My whole body felt different. I went to bed at 10 o'clock at night and woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning paralyzed from the diaphragm down. I was transported to the hospital and admitted to the COVID-19 unit. Took several days to figure out what was happening. The doctors were uncertain how to treat me. They'd never treated anybody with these problems before, and they could not decide on a diagnosis. Eventually, they found out I had a blood clot in my leg. My entire spinal cord had swollen and hemorrhaged. I aspirated on water, placed on a ventilator. I was in ICU for 2 weeks. I was worried, concerned. My wife panicked about my condition. My life as I knew it was gone. All totaled, I spent 105 days in St. Luke's Regional Hospital, St. Alphonsus Rehab Center in Boise, Idaho, and the University of Utah's Craig Nielsen's Rehab Hospital. I have had multiple MRIs, CAT scans, EKGs, X-rays, spinal angiograms, spinal taps, autoimmune blood tests, muscle biopsies. Everything has come back negative in an attempt trying to pin my paralysis on my body and not the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Today, I am an unemployed paraplegic who's learning an entire new lifestyle. And the only thing I did between full health and my current condition is take a shot. I am real, my symptoms are real, and my life forever has changed. And that is real. This has affected, these stories you're listening to has affected husbands, wives, children, brothers, sisters, friends. Please pay attention. Thank you.
My name is Susanna Newell. I live in St. Paul with my husband and 2 teenage children. On April 13th, I very willingly followed the recommendation of the CDC and received my second Pfizer shot. At that point, my whole life changed. I'm currently on disability, but I work in corporate social responsibility. I was previously an active long-distance biker and triathlete. I had no known underlying health conditions, and I live a very, very healthy lifestyle. I was used to high energy, highly motivated lifestyle. I love keeping my body and my mind strong and disciplined. Since I became injured, I have very little motivation or energy, and I'm in a constant state of extreme fatigue. I struggled to retrieve words. I was valedictorian in my high school. And to remember things, I can't concentrate or focus, and my brain is in constant fog. And I'm aimlessly wandering through my brain, and it's torture. I developed a rash on my forehead. I constantly have loud ringing in my ears. My once strong body aches constantly. I have no relief for the pain in my joints, except for acupuncture. It's like I aged 40 years overnight. I'm intermittently dizzy, my vision is blurry, my right pupil is not dilating properly, my right leg has extreme burning pain, and I also get muscle spasms and twitches, and I have internal vibrations. I am now a frequent flyer at the doctor with very few answers and many, many painful tests. I see a neurologist, rheumatologist, cardiologist, gynecologist, neuro-ophthalmologist, and physical therapist, among others. Most doctors are overworked, and they're unaware that this condition is even possible. So each visit, I have to fight to be believed and not written off as anxious.
My name is Calais Rodriguez. I'm 35 years old, and I spent most of the beginning of this year snowboarding and working out in the gym. I have also been lucky enough to be a stay-at-home mama who loves to sing, dance, and take my kids for random road trips to find adventures and make memories. I got COVID in February, and it almost killed me. And so because of that, I received my first Pfizer vaccine on April 13th and my second dose on May 5th. On June 29th, 2021, my happy, predictable daily life came to a screeching halt. I lost my ability to speak naturally. I have become unable to walk without a walker and never know if or when the tremors will come or go. I can no longer cook, clean, or even pick up and hold my baby for too long before my body begins to shake uncontrollably or is thrown into excruciating amounts of pain. I've been to the ER more times than I can count, and as a result have seen countless ER doctors, as well as 2 neurologists who have given me no diagnoses, no further testing besides regular blood work, CT scans, EEGs, EKGs, and an MRI, all of which the doctors told me came back normal. I am now seeing a functional medicine doctor and a chiropractor who seem to be the only 2 willing to help me to find out what's happening to my body. My quiet life has suddenly become very public, and with that has come so much ugliness and bitterness from people who know just the surface of what's happened to me after this vaccine. It has become the loneliest and most isolating experience I've had in my 35 years of life. I have been made to feel that I do not matter to those in Western medicine, that I am nothing more than an annoyance and waste of time. I deserve to be heard and treated with compassion, but instead I have been called a liar and a fake, and I have even been told by the ER doctors that this is all in my head and that there is nothing medically wrong with me.
Hello, I'm Peter Doshi. For identification purposes, I'm on the faculty at the University of Maryland and editor at the BMJ. I have no relevant conflicts of interest, and my comments today are my own. In pharmacy school, I teach a required course on how to critically appraise the medical literature. We train students on how to go beyond a study abstract and start to pick apart and critically assess biomedical studies, not just take them at face value. I want to use my 5 minutes here to harness that spirit of critical thinking. I'm saddened that we are supersaturated as a society right now in the attitude of everybody knows that has shut down intellectual curiosity and led to self-censorship. So let me start with a few everybody knows examples that I'm not sure we should be so certain about. Everybody knows that this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. But if hospitalizations and deaths were almost exclusively occurring in the unvaccinated, why would booster shots be necessary? Or why would the statistics be so different in the UK, where most COVID hospitalizations and deaths are among the fully vaccinated, as Senator Johnson said? There's a disconnect there. There's something to be curious about. There's something not adding up, and we should all be asking, is it true that this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated? What does that even mean? Next slide, please. Then there's this. Everybody knows that COVID vaccines save lives. In fact, we've known this from early 2021. The clinical trials proved that to be the case, as you can see here in the quote of a February article in the Journal of the American Medical Association. But is it true? When that statement by prominent public health officials was penned, there had been just one death across the 70,000 Pfizer and Moderna trial participants. Today we have more data, and you can see that there were similar numbers of deaths in the vaccine and placebo groups. The trials did not show a reduction in death. Even for COVID deaths, as opposed to other causes, the evidence is flimsy, with just 2 deaths in the placebo group versus 1 in the vaccine group. My point is not that I know the truth about what the vaccine can and cannot do. My point is that those who claimed the trials showed the vaccines were highly effective in saving lives were wrong. The trials did not demonstrate this. I've been reviewing industry-sponsored clinical trials for over a decade, and I tend to agree with Dr. Healy that business and marketing often seems to be in the driver's seat. In my case, it took place a decade ago in the midst of another pandemic, swine flu. And for 4 years, we fought to gain access to the clinical trial data for the drug Tamiflu. Instead of an 8-page journal article telling us about a clinical trial, we wanted the 1,000 pages of internal company study documents that we knew were under the waterline. The fact that the Tamiflu data were inaccessible came as a shock to even the editors of medical journals, who had reasonably assumed that since data is fundamental to the scientific process, surely it must be available. But it wasn't then for Tamiflu, and it isn't today for COVID vaccines. In fact, if you're interested in analyzing the data for, say, Pfizer's trial, you'll have to wait until May 2025 before you can even request it from the company. For Moderna, they recently said that the data, quote, may be available with publication of the final study results in 2022, end quote. And since the trial's not officially to end until October 2022, we're probably talking late 2022. So yes, the trial has still not ended. And yes, doctors and researchers who want to see the clinical trial data will have to wait another year from now before getting access. For J&J, try next July. If you weren't aware that the data were inaccessible, I suspect this is because so few healthcare practitioners and researchers are accustomed to conducting an independent review of the raw data. So there's little outcry when those data are inaccessible. And next slide, please. So while we're told to keep following the science, What we are following is not a scientific process based on open data. We're following a process in which the data are treated as secret. And in my view, there's something very unscientific about that. I feared we would end up in this situation because data secrecy, I'm sorry to say, is the status quo. In 2015, the Institute of Medicine published a consensus study calling for a culture change in which data sharing became the norm, not the exception. But not enough has changed. Last August, before we had results from any of the pivotal COVID vaccine trials, I co-authored a commentary with Dr. Healy, saying clinicians and professional societies need to declare up front that they will not endorse treatments or vaccines unless there is complete data transparency. The point I'm trying to make is fairly simple. The data for COVID vaccine trials isn't available, and it won't be available for years. Yet we are not just asking, but mandating millions of people take these products. Whatever word you want to use to describe this situation, without data, it's not science.
Our next participant is Attorney Aaron Seary. Aaron represents Dr. Patricia Lee, a very brave and courageous physician like all the people sitting before you here today, that simply could not remain silent any longer and wrote to the agencies about what she was seeing in her practice. And of course, the agencies, as they've done across the board here, pretty much ignored her. So, Mr. Seary.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Johnson, and thank everybody for sharing their stories. I know it cannot be easy to do so. My firm of over 20 professionals has represented individuals injured by vaccines for many years. And so we're very familiar with these heartbreaking stories, and I empathize with every one of you. While we've been representing people for vaccine injury for quite a while, it wasn't until the COVID-19 vaccine that our phones, emails, form submissions have reached an avalanche of submissions. If we could actually sue the pharmaceutical companies for all those injuries, it would actually be humanly impossible for my firm, or I think the collective efforts of all attorneys around the country that handle vaccine injury cases, which are about 100 attorneys right now, to handle all of those matters. As things stand right now, you can't sue Pfizer, J&J, or Moderna for any of the injuries. You can't bring a claim in the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program either. You're relegated to a program called CICP, which has a standard of proof that makes it almost impossible to obtain compensation, and even if you do prevail, the amount of compensation is de minimis for the most part. Among the folks that have contacted our firm are many physicians from across the country who themselves have suffered vaccine injuries. I've spoken to many of them, and while their stories vary, their injuries vary, there are three common themes that they all convey. The first one is that, and we heard a lot of you express the same here today, is that after they suffered an injury, they went to the very medical establishment that they work in to go and get treatment. And even though they themselves were physicians, the initial reaction they often got was one of, "We don't believe you." Often they were told it was psychological, referred to counseling, instead of treating the injuries that were being presented. And these are physicians. A lot of times they had to go to physicians that they went to medical school with or who they had worked with, those colleagues who would believe them. The other common theme is that they, for the most part, report that they submitted a VAERS report, that they had to do it, and often their physicians didn't, and that after submitting the VAERS reports, like many of you, they expected a phone call that never came. And a lot of them explain how they then would take the initiative to directly contact the CDC or the FDA or public health authorities themselves. And again, it was either silence or after an exchange of some nature, the end result was typically the same. Don't worry. Theirs is not seeing this safety problem, so it's not an issue. Nothing to see here. Your issue is not an issue because it's not an issue in theirs. One of the things that I often ask physicians who contact the firm is, will you make public the failing of our public health agencies? And that's often has the same reaction as well. And that is one of immense fear. The fear of retaliation from public health officials and the medical establishment if they come forward with even their own story of their own injury is palpable. No physician agreed to go forward until, as you pointed out, Senator, Dr. Patricia Lee, who herself was not injured by a vaccine, but as a matter of conscience, she simply could no longer sit idly by after seeing a series of extraordinarily serious injuries after COVID vaccinations. She did what every other physician should do. She reported those series of cases to VAERS. She was expecting that somebody would contact her. And nobody did. And not just any cases. A young woman who's pregnant, became paraplegic, lived just long enough to have her baby and die a month later. 2 other young women who lost most of their small intestines. Incredibly devastating injuries. She waited for the call that never came. And when it didn't come, she did what many of you did. She wrote a letter directly to the CDC and the FDA. This letter right here. She sent it on September 28, 2021. It's publicly available. You can read what she sent them. She waited 1 day, 2 days, 7 days. No response. On the 8th day, my firm sent a letter asking the FDA and CDC, are you really going to ignore this mainstream pediatrician trained at Harvard and Georgetown medical centers who is telling you about serious injuries from this product? They did respond to her eventually. And they even actually had a meeting with her. And what did they tell her? Nothing to see. There's no safety signal in VAERS, so everything is fine.
I'm an avid believer in modern medicine. Me and my 6 children are fully vaccinated with all the traditional vaccines, including flu vaccines. And I'm personally vaccinated with the Moderna vaccine. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm just happen to be a scientist that challenge the current narrative that dominates public policy, public health policies around the world, in the US and in Israel. And while it's being called the mainstream narrative, I personally find it very extreme. In fact, I'm quite sure that it will be considered extreme by any fundamental principle that we have about management of global pandemics until 2 years ago. So I don't want to repeat everything that was said here, but I can tell you that I know many mainstream scientists and medical professionals who, similar to me, think that the current narrative is extreme and wrong. But very few of them are willing to speak up. And I'm not sure I can blame them, because any attempt to deviate from the main narrative today is faced with a wall of hostility, rejection, and even elimination from the government, including funding agencies, from public media, and worst of all, from the scientific community itself.